Atlantic Airways Flight 394 was about to take off from London to Toronto. In the busy terminal, passengers made their final adjustments before boarding. Among them, a girl with brown hair and piercing eyes was firmly holding the hand of a tall, imposing man. She wore a pale green dress, which seemed at odds with the tense surroundings. The man, called Victor, had a closed, almost severe expression and seemed disconnected from what was happening around him, focused only on the cell phone he was holding tightly. The flight attendant, Nathan D., was making final checks when something caught his eye. He had served on many flights and passed countless passengers, but something about that girl, Sophie, made him stop for a moment. There was a strange calm in his eyes, a stillness that seemed out of place for a child about to embark on a long journey. But it was the way she looked around, as if she was constantly looking for a way out, that made Nathan uneasy. As passengers began to board, Nathan made sure to keep Sophie and Victor in his sights. He approached discreetly, offering a professional smile. The girl looked up at him, and in that brief eye contact, Nathan felt a chill. There was something wrong. He didn't know what, but his instinct, honed by years of experience, warned him to pay attention. When Sophie and Victor finally settled into row 16, Nathan made a conscious effort to continue with his work. But the feeling that something was wrong persisted. Sophie continued to observe her surroundings with unusual attention for a child her age. It wasn't the usual nervousness of flying for the first time. It was something deeper, more rooted. Victor, on the other hand, barely noticed his daughter's presence. His eyes were fixed on his cell phone screen, and every second he seemed more distant, more disconnected from the reality around him. As Nathan walked past them, he couldn't help but notice the tension between the two. The girl, for a brief moment, looked at him again, and Nathan felt a shiver run down his spine. That look carried a message that he still couldn't decipher, but that told him clearly, there is something very wrong here. With takeoff imminent, Nathan continued with routine checks, but his mind was fixed on row 16. He couldn't shake the feeling that this flight would be anything but ordinary. As the plane's doors closed and the engines roared to life, Nathan knew he would need to be alert. Something told him that the flight's destination was about to be dramatically changed, and he was determined to find out what it was before it was too late. Flight 394 took off. But for Nathan, this wouldn't be just another trip. The mystery he felt in the air, the uneasiness growing within him, suggested that this journey was just beginning, and that something dark was about to unfold in the skies between London and Toronto. Atlantic Airways Flight 394 had finally stabilized its altitude, and the faint hum of the engines became a constant background. For most passengers, the flight was now entering the quiet phase, an opportunity to relax, read a book, or take a nap. But for Nathan, the flight attendant with years of experience, that calmness was just a facade. He had learned over the years that danger could hide precisely in moments of apparent calm. As he walked down the aisle, checking every detail of the in-flight service, his mind continued to dwell on the girl in row 16, Sophie. His restless gaze, the subtle movements of his hands, and the distant demeanor of Victor, who Nathan assumed was his father. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than met the eye. Nathan stopped at the galley, pretending to organize the utensils, but his mind was racing. He analyzed every piece of information he had captured so far. Sophie seemed to be trying to communicate, but couldn't do so openly. This suggested that the danger came from someone nearby, possibly Victor. But why? And what exactly was at stake? Nathan's mind worked feverishly as he tried to piece together the puzzle. Deciding he needed a second opinion, Nathan took Rachel, his trusted colleague, to a discreet corner. "Rachel, I need you to help me with something," he said, keeping his voice low. He then quickly explained what he had observed. Sophie's restlessness, the gestures she made with her hands, and Victor's absent but at the same time vigilant behavior. Rachel listened intently, and when Nathan finished, she was silent for a moment, pondering the information. "It looks like the girl is trying to communicate without him noticing," Rachel said thoughtfully. "That's not a good sign. If she's scared to talk in front of him, it could mean he's the danger." Nathan nodded, feeling that Rachel was getting exactly what he feared too. "We need to be sure," he said. "But how do we do this without alarming anyone? If he senses we're suspicious, he may act unpredictably." Rachel suggested that they begin discreetly monitoring row 16 while trying to find a safe way to communicate with Sophie. They needed to find out if she really was in danger, and, if so, how they could protect her. Nathan and Rachel began to carefully execute their plan. At every opportunity that arose, one of the two would pass by row 16, observing any changes in Sophie and Victor's behavior. The tension between the two was palpable. Sophie continued to make small gestures with her hands, now more frantically, as if she were racing against time. Victor, on the other hand, seemed to be increasingly aware of his surroundings, his behavior suggesting that he was aware that something was not right, but not knowing exactly what. During one of the moments when Nathan passed row 16, he noticed that Sophie was tracing something in the air with her fingers. He slowed down, pretending to be adjusting a luggage compartment, and tried to decipher the movements. She was drawing letters one at a time, but the rhythm was irregular, as if she was nervous or afraid of being caught. It was then that Nathan realized what she was trying to communicate. She was writing the word, "Help me." Nathan felt a shiver run down his spine. There were no more doubts. Sophie was asking for help. But how to act without Victor noticing and putting the girl in even more danger? Nathan returned to the galley, where Rachel was waiting for him. "She's asking for help," he said bluntly. "We need to do something, but we need to be extremely careful." Rachel suggested they try an indirect approach. If they could communicate with Sophie in some safe way, without Victor noticing, they could better understand the situation and come up with a plan. Nathan agreed and decided the next step would be to try and talk to Sophie while passing out the drinks, something he could do without arousing suspicion. Nathan picked up a tray of drinks and began serving the passengers, keeping his focus on row 16. As he approached Sophie, he discreetly leaned in and in a low voice asked, "Are you okay?" Sophie looked at him with those big, scared eyes, but didn't respond. Victor raised his head and looked directly at Nathan, as if he was suspicious of something. Nathan maintained his composure, smiled politely, and offered the drink. Victor declined with a nod, and Nathan moved on. But he knew he had managed to establish contact, however brief, with Sophie. Time seemed to slow down as Nathan and Rachel tried to think of a way to protect Sophie without triggering a violent reaction from Victor. They considered several options, including alerting the pilot or other crew members, but each plan seemed too risky without more information. It was then that Nathan had an idea. He decided to write a short, discreet message on his notepad that could be shown to Sophie without Victor noticing. He returned to row 16, pretending he was taking orders, and discreetly showed Sophie the notebook. The message read, "Are you in danger?" Sophie looked at the note and then at Nathan. She hesitated for a moment, but then gave a slight nod. This confirmed everything Nathan feared. The girl was really in danger, and now he needed to act, but without alerting Victor. As Nathan walked away, his heart beat faster. He knew that every minute counted and that he needed to be extremely careful. Any false move could put Sophie in immediate danger. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and Nathan felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He and Rachel continued to monitor the situation, trying to come up with a plan that would ensure Sophie's safety. The turbulence that shook the plane a few minutes later only increased the tension, but Nathan was determined to remain calm and find a solution. As the flight continued, Nathan noticed that Victor was starting to become more suspicious. He looked around more often and seemed to be aware that something was wrong. Nathan knew he would need to act soon, before the situation got out of control. Nathan and Rachel exchanged a meaningful look. They were on edge, knowing that any misstep could trigger a dangerous reaction. The mystery surrounding Sophie and Victor was deepening, and Nathan felt that the true nature of the danger had not yet been revealed. However, he knew that one way or another, this flight was about to take a dramatic turn. Nathan was aware that time was not on his side. Every minute that passed caused the tension on board to increase, and the need to act became more and more urgent. He knew Sophie was in danger, but the information he had was limited. What did Victor really want? What did he plan? And most of all, how could he guarantee Sophie's safety without triggering an unpredictable reaction? As Nathan pondered these questions, he continued to observe the cabin, disguising his concern as he carried out his tasks. He knew that every move needed to be carefully planned. One false step could result in disastrous consequences. He decided the best approach would be to try communicating with Sophie again, but this time, without risking alerting Victor. Nathan returned to the galley and chatted briefly with Rachel. "We need to find out more details," he said in a whisper. "We can't do anything hasty without knowing exactly what's going on." Rachel agreed, suggesting they try to create an opportunity to get closer to Sophie without arousing suspicion. They decided that the next round of drinks would be the ideal time to do so. As Nathan prepared to serve the drinks, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. He knew he needed to remain calm, but the urgency of Sophie's cry for help was burned into his mind. He couldn't help but think about what might happen if he couldn't act in time. When he reached row 16, Nathan bowed slightly, pretending to hand over a drink. He kept his voice low, almost a whisper. "Sophie, I need you to tell me what's going on. I will help you, but I need more information." Sophie looked at him, fear still present in her eyes, but there was also a spark of hope. She knew Nathan was trying to help her, but she also knew she was risking a lot by trying to communicate with him. With subtle movements, Sophie lowered her head, pretending to adjust something on her lap, while whispering back, "My father. He took me without my mother knowing. Said we're moving forever. I don't want to go. Please help me." His words were filled with suppressed panic, and Nathan felt a knot form in his stomach. The situation was worse than he imagined. Sophie wasn't just scared. She was being taken against her will, and Victor clearly had no benign intentions. Nathan knew there was little time to act now. He needed to create a plan that would guarantee Sophie's safety without awakening Victor's wrath. He glanced discreetly at Rachel, who was at the back of the booth, and she nodded slightly, signaling that she was ready for whatever came next. Upon returning to the galley, Nathan and Rachel quickly discussed their options. They could try to isolate Sophie from Victor, perhaps using an excuse to take her to the cockpit or a safe area of the plane. But how to do this without Victor noticing and reacting violently? And, more importantly, how to ensure that Sophie remained safe until the plane landed? Rachel suggested that they create a distraction, something that would keep Victor occupied long enough so that Sophie could be taken to safety. "Maybe a false emergency," she suggested. "We can say there is a technical problem, and we need to move some passengers to the front of the plane. This could give us time to act." Nathan considered the idea. It was risky, but it could work. They needed a plausible pretext, something that would not only take Victor out of the equation temporarily, but also justify Sophie's move. "Let's do this," he said finally, determination firm in his voice. "But we need to be quick and coordinated. Any hesitation could put Sophie in more danger." Rachel prepared for action, while Nathan returned to the hallway, pretending he was doing routine checks. He knew he needed to stay calm, but each step felt heavier than the last. The tension was almost unbearable, and he couldn't help but wonder if he could protect Sophie in time. When Nathan finally reached row 16 again, he noticed that Victor was more attentive than before. His eyes followed Nathan's every move, and he looked suspicious, as if he sensed something was wrong. This only increased the pressure on Nathan, who now needed to act more cautiously than ever. Nathan approached Sophie and, in one swift movement, slid a small piece of paper to her, hidden in the palm of her hand. On the paper, he had written, "Prepare to leave your seat when I say so. Trust in me." Sophie looked at the paper for a split second before quickly hiding it. She gave a slight nod, indicating that she understood the plan. Nathan then headed to the back of the cabin where Rachel was already positioned. They were ready to put the plan into action. Rachel, in her calm, authoritative voice, announced over the intercom system that they were experiencing a minor technical glitch and that they needed to move some passengers to the front of the plane as a safety measure. The cabin was filled with murmurs as passengers tried to understand what was happening. Victor frowned, clearly suspicious, but he didn't have time to react before Nathan approached and indicated that he and Sophie needed to move. "Sir, We need you and your daughter to come with us to the front of the plane. It's a standard security measure, Nathan said, keeping his voice steady. Victor hesitated, but given the looks of the other passengers and Nathan's authoritative tone, he had no choice but to comply. As Victor and Sophie stood up, Nathan made a subtle sign to Rachel, who was ready to lead them. Nathan knew this was the decisive moment. Any mistake, any hesitation, could be costly. As they walked down the hallway, Nathan maintained a confident stance, but inside, he was on high alert. When they finally reached the front of the plane, Nathan guided Sophie to a seat, trying to keep her as far away from Victor as possible, who continued to watch everything with growing suspicion. Rachel, in turn, began to explain the supposed technical failure to Victor, trying to keep his attention away from Sophie. Nathan leaned into Sophie, trying to convey calm and reassurance. "We'll keep you safe, Sophie. Trust us," he said in a low voice. Sophie nodded, but the fear was still evident in her eyes. She knew the situation was far from resolved, and Nathan felt the same. While Victor was distracted, Nathan used the opportunity to send a signal to the cockpit, informing the crew of the situation and requesting immediate assistance upon landing. The response was quick. The police would be waiting at the airport, ready to intervene as soon as the plane landed. The plan was in motion, but Nathan knew the most dangerous moment was yet to come. At any moment, Victor could realize what was happening and react unpredictably. The clock was ticking, and every second seemed to last an eternity. Nathan and Rachel continued to monitor Victor closely, trying to keep the situation under control. The tension was palpable, and Nathan knew that any change in Victor's behavior could mean he had realized what was happening. He needed to be ready to act, ready to protect Sophie at any cost. As the plane began its descent, Nathan realized that the situation was reaching its climax. The next actions would be crucial, and he was prepared to face any challenge that arose. Sophie's safety was in his hands, and he would not fail. As Atlantic Airways Flight 394 began its descent toward Toronto, the tension inside the cabin reached unbearable levels. Nathan was aware that every move counted. The plan to separate Sophie from Victor had been successful so far, but he knew the critical moment was yet to come. At any sign that something was wrong, Victor could act in unpredictable and dangerous ways. The silence in the cabin was disturbing. Rachel continued to distract Victor with technical explanations about the supposed failure, while Nathan took Sophie under his wing. He could feel the weight of Victor's gaze, which seemed to oscillate between distrust and uneasiness. Victor was no fool. He knew something was off, and Nathan was prepared for anything. Every second that passed seemed to drag on infinitely. Nathan felt sweat starting to run down the back of his neck, but his expression remained firm, unshakable. He knew he couldn't let any emotion show that could alert Victor. He needed a strategy that would ensure Sophie was safe until authorities could intervene. But how? Time seemed to slip through his fingers as he tried to formulate a plan. The plane's descent was slow, and Nathan couldn't shake the thought that any failure now could be fatal. He needed to ensure that Victor didn't have the chance to realize what was happening and react unpredictably. He needed something that would keep Victor distracted long enough so that Sophie could be removed from the plane as soon as they landed. And then, amid the tension, an idea emerged. Simple but effective. Nathan decided the best way to keep Victor busy was to involve him directly. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but there was no other option. If he could keep Victor occupied with a convincing conversation, it might give Sophie the time she needed to be taken to safety. With a deep breath, Nathan walked over to Victor. "Sir, I know this situation may seem inconvenient, but we are doing everything we can to ensure the safety of everyone on board. If you would accompany us to the front of the cabin, we can discuss how to resolve this situation quickly." Victor looked at Nathan with narrowed eyes, analyzing every word. What exactly is going on? His voice was cold, calculating. Nathan remained calm. "We are experiencing a minor technical glitch that requires some passengers to be reassigned. It's nothing you need to worry about. It's just a precautionary measure." As he spoke, he made a subtle gesture to Rachel, signaling her to begin discreetly moving Sophie away. Victor hesitated, his eyes moving between Nathan and his daughter. There was a moment of tension in the air, as if time had stopped. Nathan held his breath, waiting for Victor to make the decision to follow his instructions. Finally, Victor nodded, slowly rising from his seat. As they walked around the cabin, Nathan continued to talk, inventing technical details about the problem they were supposedly facing. He knew every word was a distraction, an attempt to keep Victor focused on him instead of Sophie. And it worked. Victor, still suspicious, seemed satisfied with Nathan's explanations, but doubt remained visible in his eyes. Rachel, on the other hand, led Sophie to the back of the plane, where other crew members were waiting. The plan was to keep her as far away from Victor as possible until the plane landed and authorities could intervene. Sophie was nervous, but she trusted Nathan and Rachel. She knew she needed to be brave, even when fear threatened to overwhelm her. As the plane continued its descent, Nathan felt the weight of responsibility increase. He was playing a dangerous game, and any mistake could ruin everything. He needed to remain calm, but the proximity of landing made every moment seem more urgent. He couldn't fail now. The conversation with Victor continued, but Nathan noticed that the man was starting to agitate. He needed a new pretext to keep Victor busy, something that wouldn't arouse suspicion but would keep him away from Sophie. Nathan then suggested that they review the disembarkation plan, claiming that it would be necessary to redistribute passengers to facilitate evacuation if the technical problem worsened. Victor reluctantly agreed, and Nathan used this as an excuse to move to the cockpit, where he could inform the pilot of the plan and ask for more time to carry out the planned evacuation. Meanwhile, Rachel continued to keep Sophie calm, reassuring her that everything would be okay. When Nathan arrived at the cockpit, he found the pilot and co-pilot in full concentration, preparing for landing. "We need a few more minutes," Nathan said quickly. "The situation is under control, but we need to ensure that the evacuation is carried out safely. We have a delicate situation with one of the passengers." The pilot nodded, adjusting the controls to prolong the approach. "Do whatever is necessary," he replied, without taking his eyes off the instruments. Nathan knew the extra time would be precious, but he also knew the tension was rising. He needed to make sure Sophie was out of danger once the plane touched down. Returning to the cabin, Nathan noticed that Victor was becoming increasingly restless. He was asking questions, trying to understand why it was taking so long. Nathan continued to use vague answers, distracting him while maintaining eye contact with Rachel, who was ready to act as soon as necessary. The plane finally began its final approach, and Nathan knew they were approaching the most critical moment. He needed to ensure that Sophie's evacuation was done quickly and discreetly, without Victor realizing what was happening until it was too late. When the plane landed with a slight bump, Nathan felt momentary relief, but knew the real challenge was about to begin. He needed to get Sophie off the plane before Victor had a chance to react. The cabin doors opened, and the crew began to coordinate disembarkation. Nathan stayed close to Victor, continuing to distract him while Rachel and another crew member prepared Sophie to exit the plane. The tension was almost unbearable, but Nathan remained calm, knowing he needed to complete the plan with precision. With Victor still focused on Nathan's instructions, Rachel took the opportunity to quickly move Sophie to the door, where a team of undercover security guards waited to take her safely off the plane. Sophie, although scared, followed the instructions with determination. She knew she was close to escaping. While Victor began to realize something was wrong, it was too late. Nathan, maintaining a calm demeanor, informed him that Sophie had already disembarked for safety reasons. Panic began to settle in Victor's eyes, but before he could react, Nathan signaled the security guards, who quickly entered and immobilized him. Sophie was quickly taken to a secure vehicle, while Victor was handcuffed and removed from the plane. Nathan felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but he knew the mission wasn't over yet. He would need to give detailed explanations to the authorities, but most of all, make sure Sophie was safe and reunited with her mother. As the adrenaline began to wane, Nathan reflected on how risky it had been. He knew he couldn't have done it alone, and he mentally thanked Rachel and the crew for the courage and precision with which they carried out the plan. Upon exiting the plane, Nathan saw Sophie being comforted by an officer who assured her that everything would be okay. She looked at Nathan, and for a moment, they shared a look of mutual understanding. Speechless, but full of meaning, they both knew they had overcome something truly difficult together. Nathan breathed one last sigh of relief as he watched Sophie being carried to safety. The situation was finally under control, but he knew that the repercussions of what had happened would echo for a long time. The silence on the plane was almost deafening. Nathan, still reeling from the latest events, watched as Victor, now handcuffed, was escorted off the aircraft. The relief of knowing that Sophie was safe mixed with the tension that still hung in the air. The situation was far from completely resolved, and Nathan knew the real ordeal was about to happen. As the plane began to empty, the crew moved quickly and precisely, trying to maintain calm among the passengers who, for the most part, were still oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. But Nathan's attention was completely focused on Victor. He knew that this man was not someone who would give in easily. As they approached the cabin door, Victor, in a last act of desperation, began to struggle violently, trying to free himself from the security guards who were escorting him. Their screams, previously contained, now echoed throughout the aircraft, drawing the attention of all the remaining passengers. The anger in their eyes was evident, and Nathan felt a chill as he realized the true nature of the danger they faced. "You can't do that! She's my daughter!" Victor screamed, his voice filled with a fury that seemed to have been suppressed for a long time. The security guards tried to control him, but Victor's strength, fueled by his desperate determination, was frightening. The fight, which until then had been contained, began to turn into a physical battle for control of the situation. Nathan knew he couldn't let Victor escape. He quickly approached, helping the security guards to immobilize the man. The tension in the air was palpable, and Victor's every movement was a reminder that the danger was still present. What should have been a simple evacuation was turning into a direct confrontation, and Nathan was determined not to allow the situation to get out of control. As they struggled to keep Victor contained, Nathan noticed something in the man's eyes, a desperation that went beyond the simple fear of being arrested. It was as if he genuinely believed he was doing what was right, even if it meant putting his own daughter at risk. Nathan's mind raced, trying to understand what could be going through Victor's head, but he knew now was not the time to question. They needed to put an end to this once and for all. Finally, after an intense struggle, the security guards managed to completely overpower Victor, forcing him to his knees on the floor of the plane. The anger in his eyes didn't lessen, but his resistance was finally running out. Nathan watched warily, ready to act if necessary, but relieved to see that the situation was finally under control. With Victor properly restrained, security guards quickly took him off the plane, while Nathan remained in the cabin, watching the scene with a mixture of relief and tiredness. He knew Sophie was safe, but what had happened there would stay in his mind for a long time. Nathan took a deep breath as the last passengers disembarked, still muttering about what they had witnessed. The flight had ended, but the feeling of danger was still in the air. He knew he needed to take one last step to ensure everything ended well, deliver a detailed report on events, and make sure Sophie was safe. As he exited the aircraft, Nathan felt the weight of recent events on his shoulders, but also a sense of accomplishment. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but he knew that the repercussions of what had happened were yet to come. And deep down, a persistent question continued to echo in his mind. What really motivated Victor, and how far would he be willing to go to get what he wanted? As Nathan finally left the plane, the cool air of the tarmac enveloped him like a balm, relieving some of the built-up tension. He had managed to keep Sophie safe, and Victor was now in custody. However, Nathan couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something still wasn't right. The atmosphere was one of relief among the crew and the authorities, but for him there was one detail that still needed to come together. He watched as Victor was taken to a police car, still handcuffed and visibly exhausted. The anger in Victor's eyes had turned into an almost resigned expression, but Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. Something in Victor's eyes still carried a threat, something unspoken, a secret that remained hidden. As Nathan walked toward the terminal, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Rachel, who was with Sophie. "She's safe, but there's something you need to know," the message said. Nathan's heart sped up. What else could there be? He quickly changed his direction and headed towards where Rachel and Sophie were. When he arrived, he found Rachel waiting for him outside a security room. "She mentioned something strange, Nathan," Rachel began, with a tone that mixed concern and confusion. "Sophie said Victor wasn't alone." Nathan frowned, a rush of adrenaline coursing through his body. What did she mean by that? Rachel looked around, making sure no one else was listening. She said she saw another man talking to Victor before boarding. She heard him mentioning something about the plan and the next step. Sophie thinks there was someone else involved, but she couldn't hear much else. Nathan felt the ground shake beneath his feet. If Victor wasn't alone, that meant the danger wasn't over yet. There was another person, perhaps still at large, who knew about the plan. And if that person were still at large, Sophie could remain at risk, as would anyone else connected to the case. "We need to inform the authorities now," Nathan said, already picking up the phone to call the security team commander. As he waited for the line to be answered, he felt the urgency building within him. The situation he thought he had resolved was far from over, and now he needed to act quickly to avoid a greater disaster. When he finally managed to speak to the head of security, Nathan informed him of the new information. "We need to tighten security around Sophie and begin an immediate search for any of Victor's accomplices. We can't take any chances." The response was immediate, and soon Nathan saw the movement of police officers intensify around the terminal. They were on high alert, aware that the situation was more complicated than it initially seemed. The sense of danger that had started on the plane was now spreading throughout the airport, and Nathan knew they were in a race against time. He returned to Rachel and Sophie, remaining calm so as not to alarm the girl. "Sophie, do you remember anything else about the man you saw?" he asked, his voice soft. Sophie thought for a moment, her eyes revealing the effort of remembering important details. "He had a scar on his face, and he wore a hat. But I didn't see much else. He was always trying to hide." Nathan nodded, processing the information. Every detail was crucial, and he knew he needed to act on what they had. The search for Victor's accomplice was underway, and every second counted. As the airport was swept by security forces, Nathan and Rachel remained by Sophie's side, ensuring she was protected. The mystery surrounding Victor and his plan was far from solved, and Nathan knew they had only scratched the surface of something much bigger. The threat still hung in the air, invisible but present. And until the last piece of this puzzle was found, Nathan would not rest. The true danger was just beginning to reveal itself. With the airport on alert, Nathan felt the weight of the last few hours pressing on his shoulders. The unfolding events had revealed a web of dangers that he could not have imagined when he first noticed Sophie. Now the mission was clear: keep Sophie safe and find Victor's accomplice before anything else happened. Sophie, still scared, remained next to Rachel, holding her hand tightly. Nathan watched the girl and saw a mixture of relief and fear in her eyes. She had been through more than any child should, and Nathan felt a deep responsibility to make sure everything ended well. As authorities tracked down any leads on the mysterious man with the scar, Nathan couldn't ignore the feeling that time was running out. Every second that passed was an opportunity for the accomplice to escape, or worse, act. He knew he needed to keep Sophie protected at any cost, but the uncertainty about his accomplice's whereabouts kept him on constant watch. Then, suddenly, a notification came over the security guard's radio. A man with the characteristics described by Sophie had been spotted near an emergency exit, trying to avoid the security cameras. Nathan felt his heart speed up. They were close to capturing him, but there was still a possibility that he could escape. Security acted quickly, surrounding the area where the man had been seen. Nathan, with Sophie and Rachel under his wing, remained in a secure room, waiting for news. The minutes that followed were filled with silent tension as Nathan tried to remain calm. He knew that the situation was reaching its climax. Finally, the news arrived. The man had been captured. Nathan breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew this wasn't the end. The investigation into the intentions of Victor and his accomplice was still just beginning, and what they discovered could be even more disturbing. With Sophie finally safe, Nathan felt a wave of emotion sweep over him. He had done his duty. but he knew the impact of that day would stay with him for a long time. He knelt down beside Sophie, who looked up at him with eyes that expressed both fear and gratitude. "You were very brave," he said, trying to convey as much calm as he could. Sophie smiled, a shy smile, but one that carried the weight of everything she had been through. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, in a voice that, despite its softness, resonated deeply. She was safe, and that was all that mattered at that moment. Nathan knew the story was far from over, but in that moment, he allowed himself to feel the relief of having saved a life. The mystery that had begun on Flight 394 was far from completely solved, but one thing was certain. He and Sophie had faced danger together and somehow had emerged stronger. Toronto Airport, now enveloped in an atmosphere of resolved tension, was beginning to return to normal. The sound of hurried footsteps and the agitated murmurs of passengers replaced the chaos and suspense that dominated the atmosphere minutes before. Nathan, exhausted but with a deep sense of accomplishment, reflected on the events that had unfolded since boarding Flight 394. Sophie was safe, finally out of reach of Victor and his accomplice. Authorities had captured the two men, but there were many questions in the air. What had really motivated Victor? What did they intend to achieve with that dark plan? And what else could be hiding in the shadows, waiting to be discovered? As Nathan watched Sophie, now accompanied by social workers and psychologists, he couldn't help but think about how small signs can reveal such big dangers. A look, a gesture, an intuition. All these seemingly insignificant elements had been crucial in diffusing a situation that could have ended in tragedy. Sophie's courage, Nathan's determination, and the quick collaboration of the crew and authorities were essential in turning what could have been a disaster into a victory. However, Nathan knew that the mystery cycle was far from over. Each answer they found brought new questions. Each solution revealed a new challenge. What had begun as a simple intuition had turned into a complex web of secrets, betrayals, and dangers. As he left the airport, the cold Toronto night enveloped him, and he looked up at the sky, where Flight 394 had cut through the clouds hours before. The lives of Nathan, Sophie, and everyone involved had changed irrevocably. But what mattered was that they had survived, that they had done what was right, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. The legacy of those events would continue to resonate, not only in the investigations that followed, but also in the lives of those who had been touched by the mystery. Nathan knew that even when everything seemed to return to normal, the impact of that day would never be forgotten. The lessons learned would be taken forward, shaping future decisions, guiding actions in times of crisis. With one last look at the airport, Nathan walked away, aware that this story, although completed, was just a part of something bigger. The cycle of mystery, fueled by the unknown and the unexpected, would continue to turn, bringing new challenges, new dilemmas, and without a doubt, new opportunities for courage and resilience to manifest themselves. He walked to his car, knowing that somewhere, other stories were waiting to be uncovered, other mysteries were waiting to be solved. And, certain that he would do it all again, he left, ready to face whatever came next. If you were intrigued by this exciting journey and want more stories full of mystery and twists, be sure to like this content and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next adventures. Ring the bell to receive first-hand notifications and share this story with your friends who love a good thriller. Now, say in the comments, what would you do if you were in Nathan's shoes? Would you have made the same decisions? We want to hear your opinion.